Judge, the main idea behind the future voting changes was taxation without representations. But the majority of 16-year-olds aren't even being taxed. Good morning, Honorable Judge and worthy opponents. My name is Vikas Kapoor, and I'm the second speaker for the opposition side of this debate. During this debate, I will begin by providing refutations to the three contentions for the proposition side, move on to rebuilding our contentions, and finally, if time permits, I would elaborate on our team's contentions. I will now begin refuting the proposition's contentions. The proposition's first contention was political education, how by teaching them how to vote and by letting them vote, they would be informed. But Judge, we're also, with our counter plan, we're also providing them political education and helping them stay intact with the voting system. We're putting in mock elections and mock trials for these 16 and 17-year-olds to practice with their voting, and so that they can also stay well informed with the government system, so that when they turn 18 and are able to vote, they can vote. Yeah.
So in your counter plan, you said that you'll provide these mock elections and stuff. How are you gonna plan to fund these?
The same way, with our help from our taxpayers and through our school, we're providing an after-school program with a school's debate or language arts teacher who is willing to take time and teach these students as an after school. If these students are willing, they may take this class. There will also be an after school option, so it wouldn't disrupt any class time.
POI.
Um, no. Their second contention was it was a diverse point of view, how these 16, 17-year-olds bring in different points. But like our first contention mentioned, with this peer influence, these different thoughts aren't really from the 16, 17-year-olds. They're being influenced by social media, as that's a big part of these 16, 17-year-olds' lives and other adults that they look up to. This gives those adults 2 votes, and which pollutes the voters, causing increased polarization. Oh. And their third contention was
POI.
it increases the chance of voting. Um, they said that because they're already being politically educated, they'd increase their interests and it would help them stay in tune to voting and add more voters in the future. But like I already stated, we're providing the same increased voter turnout by giving the 16, 17-year-olds political education so they're in tune for the future elections. I'll now begin rebuilding the contentions that they targeted. They said they targeted our first contention by saying that 18, the brain isn't fully developed. But like our second contention said, there are so many differences between the 16 and 18-year-olds, because they said that the 16 or as an 18-year-old, they also sorry, one second. They stated that for the 18-year-olds, their brain also isn't fully developed. But Judge, as an 18-year-old, they can be enlisted and drafted into the military. They can play at the casino. They have already been deemed as society that they are mature enough to vote. As for a 16-year-old, instead of actually going to jail or prison, they're sent to juvenile. For an 18-year-old, they are sent to jail and prison. These 18-year-olds are treated like adults, while these 16-year-olds stay treated as kids. They
POI.
target their second contention by saying 16-year-olds do have some of the same rights as the 18-year-olds, targeting a representation without taxation. But Judge, although they might share some similarities, there's still a huge gap between how these two people are treated. Like I've already stated, there's a difference between juvenile and prison. There's a huge difference between how these people are treated and how they should be treated. I'll now begin elaborating on our team's contentions. Our team's first contention was lack of cognitive capabilities. Like I said, 16 and 17-year-olds have already been deemed by society as unprepared to vote. And this is because that they're also not really treated the same. They can be influenced by peers in social media and other databases that they use, which would give
POI.
them, those people, 2 votes and everyone else, and which would polarize votes. Our team's second contention is that representation without taxation. Judge, like I said, the majority of these 16-year-olds aren't really taxed, and they aren't really treated the same way as many of the 18-year-olds already. The proposition did argue that it would help diverse voters because a lot of our government members are old and they wouldn't really understand these young guns. But like already 18-year-olds also just came out of high school and are able to vote based on what they see fit for the high schoolers and other people who are around their age. Financially, I would like to elaborate on our third contention, which what we were not able to elaborate on in our first speech, which is the financial burden it would put on with so many voters already rushing in from 16 and 17-year-olds, it would increase polarization and cause a huge financial burden on the government. This would mean more staff, more ballots, and more people to actually fund, which would mean more payments for the government to handle. Thank you, Judge. Or before I finish, it makes it clear, Judge, would you rather have polarized votes destroying the government, or would you rather have more people voting at a young age without or giving other people two votes? It's pretty clear that by saving votes to a later date for 16 and 17-year-olds, we help keep society in tune with voting, while also not reducing polarization in votes. Thank you, Judge, and I think pretty sure it's clear that opposition should win this debate.
The speech at 25.5. It was a very solid speech that fulfilled most of the speaker's burdens, particularly in refutation and rebuilding. To justify the score, I want to first define what the job of the second Opp speech actually is. I want to see three main things from this speech. First of all, I want to see refuting the prop arguments that are still standing, responding to anything new from prop's second speech, and rebuilding any arguments that prop successfully attacked in the previous speech. And while doing those three things, I want to see some impact change. So it is not enough to tell me that an argument is true. I want to see why it matters, what happened because of it, and why that outcome is important. The strongest part of this speech was his refutation of prop's political education and future voting arguments. The speaker correctly identified that prop's first and third contentions could largely be answered by Opp's counterplan. If the goal is to make 16 and 17-year-olds more politically educated and more comfortable with voting, Opp's proposed mock elections and political education could accomplish some of that without actually lowering the voting age. This was a good attempt to attack the mechanism behind the case. The speaker also did a good job rebuilding the maturity argument, and particularly the comparison between 16 and 18-year-olds was one of, if not the biggest piece of clash in the entire ad. However, there were significant weaknesses. First, the development of the counterplan. The round was a bit odd in that the first Opp speaker really just mentioned a counterplan but did not develop or explain it. If during prop's second speech they had any attack to this counterplan or refuted it in any way, I'd say that during this second Opp speech, any further development of the counterplan would have been really hard to take with any value because it was only developed after it got attacked. However, prop did not attack this counterplan in their speech, so I would have liked to see some more development in this second Opp speech. Most references to this counterplan by Opp felt like they were just creating this imaginary plan that solves all these problems without actually explaining how it does any of that. Second, several of the arguments lacked a sufficiently developed claim or an impact chain. The speaker repeatedly argues that 16 and 17-year-olds can be influenced by social media, peers, adults, and then says this could give certain people effectively, quote-unquote, two votes, and also increase polarization. This was the closest that Opp got to a good causal chain. However, we're not fully there yet. Why does influence among younger voters necessarily translate into significantly different voting outcomes? Why does that produce enough polarization to outweigh prop's benefits? These are the things that really needs to be developed more. Presentation and organization-wise, the speech was generally understandable. It was organized. There was some good signposting. Another note, I, as the judge in this round, should have stopped the speech at 5 minutes and 15 seconds after the grace period was over. I think this was a solid 25.5 speech. If I saw a bit more actual interaction with prop's contentions and some further development of the impacts, I would move this into the 26 very quickly.